including food, became scarce owing to suppliers' safety fears. Fishing was prohibited, causing further supply shortages. 6. Lacking any safe alternative, on the 16th of December, tanks 611 and 619 were emptied of the remaining lick by reactivating the plant and continuing the manufacture of pesticide. Despite safety precautions such as having water-carrying helicopters continually overflying the plant, this led to a second mass evacuation from Bhopal. The Government of India passed a Bhopal Gas Leak Disaster Act that gave the government rights to represent all victims, whether or not in India. Complaints of lack of information or misinformation were widespread. An Indian government spokesman said, "Carbide is more interested in getting information from us than in helping our relief work." 6. Formal statements were issued that air, water, vegetation, and foodstuffs were safe, but people were warned not to consume fish. The number of children exposed to the gases was at least 200,000. 6. Within weeks the state government established a number of hospitals, clinics, and mobile units in the gas-affected area to treat the victims. S. Ravi Rajan, Professor Environmental Studies, UC Santa Cruz, outlines the financially-driven undertones of the company's actions. UCC had participated in decades of previous instances of environmental negligence in every part of the world, directing its responsibility to its shareholders and numerous dealings with local and international political and economic powers. 34. The company's response to the Bhopal accident was what Rajan describes as a campaign of erasure. 34, meaning the transfer of liability and responsibility of the cause of the gas leak, the event itself, and the aftermath. Rajan then argues that this type of response is to be expected according to the established cultural practice. 34, within large corporations such as UCC. Since UCC absolved itself from the situation, the Indian government was the next institution that was looked to by the people of Bhopal, but they had also not prepared for such an event. The government's attempts at short and long-term plans failed in successfully aiding victims and instead created an ecology of opportunity, built largely at the expense of their victims. 34. Subsequent legal action. Legal proceedings involving UCC, the United States and Indian governments, local Bhopal authorities, and disaster victims started immediately after the catastrophe. The Indian government passed the Bhopal Gas Leak Act in March 1985, allowing the Government of India to act as the legal representative for victims of the disaster. 39, leading to the beginning of legal proceedings. Initial lawsuits were generated in the United States federal court system. On the 17th of April, 1985, Federal District Court Judge John F. Keenan, overseeing one lawsuit, suggested that fundamental human decency required Union Carbide to provide between $5 million and $10 million to immediately help the injured and suggested the money could be number of women pictured in black and white color, sitting and protesting against Anderson and the company. Victims of Bhopal disaster march in September 2006 demanding the extradition of Warren Anderson from the United States. Quickly distributed through the International Red Cross. 40. UCC, on the notion that doing so did not constitute an admission of liability and the figure could be credited toward any future settlement or judgment, offered a $5 million relief fund 2 days later. 40. The Indian government turned down the offer. 41. In March 1986, UCC proposed a settlement figure, endorsed by plaintiffs' U.S. attorneys, of $350 million that would, according to the company, generate a fund for Bhopal victims of between $500–600 million over 20 years. In May, litigation was transferred from the United States to Indian courts by a U.S. District Court ruling. Following an appeal of this decision, the U.S. Court of Appeals affirmed the transfer in November 1986, judging that USL was a separate entity, owned, managed and operated exclusively by Indian citizens in India. 39. The government of India refused the offer from Union Carbide and claimed $3.3 billion. 6. The Indian Supreme Court told both sides to come to an agreement and start with a clean slate in November 1988. 39. Eventually, in an out-of-court settlement reached in February 1989, Union Carbide agreed to pay $470 million for damages caused in the Bhopal disaster. 6. The amount was immediately paid. Throughout 1990, the Indian Supreme Court heard appeals against the settlement. In October 1991, the Supreme Court upheld the original $470 million, dismissing any other outstanding petitions that challenge its original decision. The court ordered the Indian government to purchase, out of settlement fund, a group medical insurance policy to cover 100,000 persons who may later develop symptoms and cover any shortfall in the settlement fund. It also requested UCC and its subsidiary USL voluntarily fund a hospital in Bhopal, at an estimated $17 million, to specifically treat victims of the Bhopal disaster. The company agreed to this. 39. Post-settlement activity. In 1991, the local Bhopal authorities charged Anderson, who had retired in 1986, with manslaughter, a crime that carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison. He was declared a fugitive from justice by the Chief Judicial Magistrate of Bhopal on the 1st of February 1992 for failing to appear at the court hearings in a culpable homicide case in which he was named the chief defendant. Orders were passed to the government of India to press for an extradition from the United States. The United States declined to extradite him, citing a lack of evidence. 42. The U.S. Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal of the decision of the lower federal courts in October 1993 against allowing victims of the Bhopal disaster to seek damages in a U.S. court. 39. In 2004, the Indian Supreme Court ordered the Indian government to release any remaining settlement funds to victims. And in September 2006, the Welfare Commission for Bhopal gas victims announced that all original compensation claims and revised petitions had been cleared. 39. In 2006, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York City upheld the dismissal of remaining claims in the case of Bano v. Union Carbide Corporation. This move blocked plaintiffs' motions for class certification and claims for property damages and remediation. In the view of UCC, the ruling reaffirms UCC's long-held positions and finally puts to rest both procedurally and substantively the issues raised in the class action complaint first filed against Union Carbide in 1999 by Hasina Bai and several organizations representing the residents of Bhopal. 39. In June 2010, 7 former employees of USL, all Indian nationals and many in their 70s, were convicted of causing death by negligence. Keshav Mahindra, former non-executive chairman of Union Carbide India Limited, VP Bhopal, Managing Director, Kishore Kanda, Vice President, Jay Mukund, Works Manager, SP Chowdhury, Production Manager, KV Shetty, Plant Superintendent, and SI Qureshi, Production Assistant. They were each sentenced to 2 years imprisonment and fined 100,000, equivalent to 220,000 or $2,800 in 2023. All were released on bail shortly after the verdict. A U.S. federal class action litigation Sahu v. Union Carbide and Warren Anderson, was filed in 1999 under the U.S. Alien Torts Claims Act, ATCA, which provides for civil remedies for crimes against humanity. 43. It sought damages for personal injury, medical monitoring and injunctive relief in the form of cleanup of the drinking water supplies for residential areas near the Bhopal plant. The lawsuit was dismissed in 2012 and the subsequent appeal was denied. 44. Warren Anderson, then 92 years old, died on the 29th of September 2014. 45. On the 14th of March, 2023, Indian Supreme Court dismissed curative petition for enhanced compensation. 46. Long-term effects. In 2018, The Atlantic called it the world's worst industrial disaster. 47. Lawyers, academics and journalists Shave described the disaster as an ecocide. 48, 49, 50, 51. Long-term health effects. Some data about the health effects are still not available. The Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, was forbidden to publish health effect data until 1994. 6. A total of 36 wards were marked by the authorities as being gas affected, affecting a population of 520,000. Of these, 200,000 were below 15 years of age, and 3,000 were pregnant women. The official India death toll was 2,259, and in 1991, 3,928 deaths had been officially certified. 2. The Samarthna Clinic estimates 8,000 deaths during the first weeks, and another 8,000 since then. 2. 6. The government of Madhya Pradesh confirmed a total of 3,787 deaths related to the gas release. 1. Later, the affected area was expanded to include 700,000 citizens. A government affidavit in 2006 stated the lake caused 558,125 injuries, including 38,478 temporary partial injuries and approximately 3,900 severe land permanently disabling injuries. 5. A cohort of 80,021 exposed people was registered, along with a control group. A cohort of 15,931 people from areas not exposed to MIG. 52. Nearly every year since 1986, they have answered the same questionnaire. It shows excess mortality and morbidity in the exposed group. Bias and confounding factors can be excluded from the study. Because of migration and other factors, 75% of the cohort is lost, as these who move out are not followed. 6. 53. A number of clinical studies are performed. The quality varies, but the different reports support each at a. 6. Studied and reported long-term health effects are eyes, chronic conjunctivitis, scars on cornea, corneal opacities, early cataracts. Respiratory tracts, obstructive and forward/or restrictive disease, pulmonary fibrosis, aggravation of tuberculosis and chronic bronchitis. Neurological system, impairment of memory, finer motor skills, numbness, etc. Psychological problems, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Children's health, peri and neonatal death rates increased. Failure to grow, intellectual impairment, etc. Missing or insufficient fields for research are female reproduction, chromosomal aberrations, cancer, immune deficiency, neurological sequelae, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and children born after the disaster. Late cases that might never be highlighted are respiratory insufficiency, cardiac insufficiency, core pulmonal, cancer and tuberculosis. Bhopal now has high rates of birth defects and records a miscarriage rate 7x higher than the national average. 19. A 2014 report in Mother Jones quotes a spokesperson for the Bhopal Medical Appeal, which runs free health clinics for survivors, as saying an estimated 120,000 to 150,000 survivors still struggle with serious medical conditions including nerve damage, growth problems, gynecological disorders, respiratory issues, birth defects, and elevated rates of cancer and tuberculosis. 54. Healthcare. The government